Hi, book club. Today we're going to be reading from the book A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. This is the story of the author, Bill, and his hike on the Appalachian Trail, which is a 2,000-mile hike that goes all the way from Georgia up to Maine. He's hiking with one of his good friends, and yeah, it's quite an adventure. All right, we are on chapter 9 right now. So here we go. In the summer of 1948, Earl Schaefer, a young man just out of the Army, became the first person to hike the Appalachian Trail from end to end in one single summer. With no tent and often navigating with nothing better than road maps, he walked for 123 days from April to August, averaging 17 miles a day. Coincidentally, while he was hiking, the Appalachian Trailway News, the Journal of the Appalachian Trail Confederates, ran a long article by Myron Avery and the magazine's editor, Gene Stevenson, explaining why an end-to-end hike was probably not possible. The trail Schaefer found was nothing like the groomed and orderly corridor that exists today. Though it was only 11 years since the trail's completion, by 1948 it was already subsiding into oblivion. Schaefer found that large parts of the trail were overgrown or erased by wholesale logging. Shelters were few, blazes often non-existent. He spent long periods bushwhacking over tangled mountains or following the wrong path when the trail forked. Occasionally, he stepped onto a highway and found that he was miles away from where he ought to be. Often, he discovered that local people were not even aware of the trail's existence, or if they knew of it, they were amazed to be told that it ran all the way from Georgia to Maine. And frequently, he was greeted with suspicion. On the other hand, even the dustiest little hamlets nearly always had a store or a cafe, unlike today. And generally, when Schaefer left the trail, he could count on flagging down a county bus for a lift to the nearest town. Although he saw almost no other hikers in the 4 months he was there, he was almost completely alone. Though he often passed small farms or cabins or found grazers tending to herds on his sunny balds, although those were mostly gone now. Today, the Appalachian Trail is a wilderness by design, since many of the properties Schaefer passed were later purchased and quietly returned to woodland. There were twice as many songbirds in the eastern United States in 1948 as now. Except for the chestnuts, the forest and the trees were healthy. Dogwood, elm, hemlocks, and red spruces still thrived. And above all, he had 2,000 miles of the trail almost completely to himself. When Schaefer completed the walk in early August, 4 months to the day after setting off, and reported his achievements to the Confederates of the Appalachian Trail headquarters, no one there actually believed him. He had to show officials his photographs and trail journals and undergo a charming and thorough cross-examination before his story was finally accepted. When the news of Schaefer's hike leaked out, it attracted a good deal of attention. Newspapers came to interview him. The National Geographic ran a long article. The Appalachian Trail underwent a modest revival. But hiking has always been a marginal pursuit in America, and then within just a few years, the Appalachian Trail was once more largely forgotten, except for a few die-hard hikers. In the early 1960s, a plan was put forward to extend the Blue Ridge Parkway, a scenic highway from the Smokies by building over the southern portion of the Appalachian Trail. That plan failed. but elsewhere the trail was nibbled away or reduced to a rutted, muddy track through zones of cormorants. In 1958, as we've seen, 20 miles were looped off the southern end from Mount Oglethorpe to Springer Mountain. And by the mid-1960s, it looked to any prudent observer as if the Appalachian Trail would survive only as scattered fragments. In the Smokies and Shenandoah National Park, from Vermont across to Maine, as forlorn relic strands in the Odd State Park, but otherwise buried under shopping malls and housing developments. Much of the trail crossed private lands, and new owners often revoked informal right-of-ways agreements, forcing confused and hastily relocations onto busy highways or other public roads. It was hardly the tranquil wilderness experience envisioned by the creator of the Appalachian Trail. And once again, the trail looked doomed. Then, in a timely piece of Fortuitous, America got a Secretary of the Interior, Stuart Udall, who actually liked hiking. Under his direction, the National Trail System Act was passed in 1968. The law was ambiguous and far-reaching, largely never realized. It envisioned 25,000 miles of new hiking trails across America, most of which were never even built. However, it did produce the Pacific Crest Trail and secured the future of the Appalachian Trail by making it a de facto national park. It also provided funds for the purchase of private lands to provide a wilderness buffer alongside of it. Now nearly all the trail passes through protected wilderness. Just 21 miles of it, less than 1% of the total, are public roads, mostly on bridges and where it passes through towns. In the half-century since Schaefer's hike, about 4,000 others have repeated the feat. There are two kinds of end-to-end hikers. Those who do it in a single season, known as through hikers, and those who do it in chunks, known as section hikers. The record for the longest section hike is 46 years. Wow. The Appalachian Trail Confederates doesn't recognize speed records on the grounds that it isn't the spirit of the experience. But that doesn't stop people from trying. In the 1980s, a man named Ward Leonard, carrying a full pack with no support crew, hiked the trail in only 60 days. An incredible feat when you consider that it would take you about 5 days to drive an equivalent distance. Oh my gosh. Wow. In May of 1991, an ultra runner named David Horton and an endurance hiker named Scott Gearson set off within 2 days of each other. Horton had a network of support crews waiting at crossroads and other strategic points, and so needed to carry nothing but a bottle of water. Each evening he was taken by car to a motel or a private home. He averaged 38.3 miles a day, with 10 or 11 hours of running. Wow. Gearson, meanwhile, merrily walked, and he did so for as much as 18 hours a day. Horton finally overtook Gearson in New Hampshire on the 39th day, reaching his goal of 52 days and 9 hours. Gearson came in a couple of days later. Okay, so there are two people who were kind of racing to finish the trail. One of them was running and was only carrying a water bottle and had people picking up and taking him to hotels to sleep at night. And this other guy was just walking it. He was on his own and he didn't have hotels to get to or anything. He just camped. And he beat the guy who was running. Huh, that's cool. Okay. All kinds of people have completed through hikes. One man hiked it in his 80s. Another person did it on crutches. A blind man named Bill Irwin hiked the trail with a seeing eye dog, falling down an estimated 5,000 times in the process. Probably the most famous, certainly the most written about of all the thru hikers was Emma, Grandma Gatewood, who successfully hiked the trail twice in her late 60s, despite being eccentric, poorly equipped, and a danger to herself. My own favorite, however, was a guy named Woodrow Murphy from Pepperell, Massachusetts, who did a thru hike in the summer of 1995. I would have liked him anyway, just for being called Woodrow. But I especially admire him when I read that he weighed 350 pounds and was doing the hike to lose weight. In the first week on the trail, he managed just 5 miles a day. But he persevered, and in August, when he reached his home state, he was up to 12 miles a day. He had lost 50 pounds, a trifle, all things considered, and the last report was considering doing it all again the following year. A significant fraction of thru hikers reach Catechin and then turn around and start back to Georgia. They just can't stop walking, which kind of makes you wonder. In fact, the more you read about thru hikers, the more you end up being filled with a kind of wonder. Take Bill Irwin, the blind man. After his hike, he said, "I never enjoyed the hiking part. It was something I felt compelled to do. It wasn't my choice." Or David Horton, the ultra runner who set a speed record in 1991. By his own account, he became a mental and emotional wreck and spent most of the period crossing Maine weeping constantly. Even good old Earl Schaefer ended up as a recluse in the backwoods of Pennsylvania. I don't mean to suggest that hiking the Appalachian Trail drives you potty, just that it takes a certain kind of person to do it. And how did I feel about giving up on the quest when a granny in her sneakers, a human beach ball named Woodrow, and over 3,990 others made it to the finish line? Well, pretty good, as a matter of fact. I was still going to hike the Appalachian Trail. I just wasn't going to hike all of it. Katz and I had already walked 500,000 steps, if you can believe it. It didn't seem altogether essential to do another 4.5 million to get the idea of the thing. So we rode to Knoxville with our comical cab driver, acquired a rental car at the airport, and found ourselves, shortly after midday, heading out of Knoxville through a half-remembered world of busy roads, dangling traffic lights, vast intersections, huge signs, an acre upon acre of shopping malls, gas stations, discount stores, muffler clinics, car lots, and all the rest. Even after a day in Gatlin, the transition was dazzling. I remember reading once how some Stone Age Indians from the Brazilian rainforest, with no knowledge or expectation of the world beyond the jungle, were taken to Sao Paulo or Rio. And when they saw what it contained, with the buildings, the cars, the passing airplanes, and how thoroughly at variance it was with their own simple lives, they wet themselves, lavishly and in unison. I believe I had some idea of how they felt. It was such a strange contrast. When you're on the Appalachian Trail, the forest is your universe, infinite and entire. That is all you experience day after day. Eventually, it's kind of all you can imagine. You are aware of course, that somewhere over the horizon, there are mighty cities, busy factories, crowded freeways. But here in this part of the country, where woods drape the landscape for as far as the eye can see, the forest rules. Even the little towns like Franklin or Hiawassee, and even Gatland, are just way stations scattered helpfully through the great cosmos of woods. But you come off the trail, properly off the trail, and drive somewhere, as we did now. You realize how magnificently deluded you have been. Here, the mountains and woods were just backup, familiar, known nearby, but no more consequential or noticed than the clouds that scattered across the ridgelines. Here, the real business was up and close and on top of you. Gas stations, Walmarts, Kmarts, Dunkin' Donuts, Blockbuster Video, a ceaseless unfolding pageant of commercial hideousness. Even Katz was unnerved by it and said, "Geez, it's ugly." He breathed in wonder, as if he had never witnessed such a thing before. I looked past him, along the line of his shoulder, to a vast shopping mall with a prairie-sized parking lot, and I agreed. It was horrible. And then lavishly and in unison, we wet ourselves. All right, that is the end of chapter 10. Or no, that's the end of chapter 9. Next week we will move on to chapter 10. All right, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the chapter. I'm sorry if I read kind of loud. Not loud, quickly. Yeah, I'll see you all soon.